Right, welcome to another Word in Your Ear, in which we talk about one of our favourite artists with one of our favourite people. The favourite artist is Kirsty MacColl, as celebrating this extraordinary 8-disc set. See That Girl. And one of the people involved in it who's written the sleeve notes is of course, Jude Rogers. Hello, Jude.
Hello.
Lovely to see you.
How you doing? How did you first get involved in this? Are you a Kirsty MacColl fan going way back or what?
Yes. I first got into Kirsty, or I remember first hearing Kirsty. It may have been Fairy Tale New York, actually. Yeah, I think it was Fairy Tale of New York. But the thing that first captivated me was, her doing Days and that amazing video. And she just stood out as being a bit different to other people. So, yeah, I've been a fan since I was a child. And I've written things about her over the years. And a lovely man called Michael Mulligan, who works for Universal Records, phoned me up one afternoon about 18 months, 2 years ago, and said, I'm trying to put together this project. It's a real labour of love for Michael, who's one of those, people who works in back cataloguing labels, who's there, desperately trying to, find tracks, license things, put together these things. As a fan, really. And he said, would you like to do, an essay? I always feel like it sounds a bit pretentious calling it an essay, but in the line.
Yes, I know what you mean.
And I said, yeah, absolutely. And, then it was, how thinking about how to do them and who to speak to was the important thing for me, and to tell a story that was about her life. Because the thing that struck me from day one is there are two things that people talk about when they talk about Kirsty. One is her vocal in Fairy Tale of New York, and one is her death and the manner of her death. And there's so much more to her than that,
Maybe you can just explain, because there's been quite a few compilations in the past, understandably, but this is really comprehensive. Give us a quick sketch of what it consists of, the 8 CDs.
So it's 8 discs. There is so much unreleased material on it. I think that's what makes it really different. There's an unreleased album from 1983.
Yes, which I didn't even know about.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
No, I'd never heard of this record. That's extraordinary. It's a whole album that was not put out.
Yeah, she'd made it, and nobody was really interested, which is extraordinary. So she just cracked on and did it. And there are lots of unreleased tracks. There are some, but it's a full survey of her life, basically. So you have the albums, you have the
BBC sessions,
and collaborations as well. And obviously, she's a great collaborator. But some that are well known, covers of her songs. Tracy Ullman's on there. There are people that you may have forgotten that she worked with. There's a really early song of her singing with her stepmother, Peggy Seeger, and her dad, Hugh MacColl, is on it as well. So it goes from 1976 to 2000.
Right.
It's interesting that she's really known for material by other people, really, isn't she? Days and New England and Fairy Tale New York. And that hopefully this will tilt things more in favour of the stuff she did herself.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a bit sad that in some ways, not to put down the fact that she's just a brilliant interpreter of other people's songs. Johnny Marr said of her once, she could take somebody else's song and make it her own. And that is absolutely true. That could seem like a cliche, but it's absolutely true. She turns Days into something quite different. Billy Bragg says, her version of a New England is the version of a New England. That's the version he plays at gigs. And I spoke to him. Obviously, you've got to speak to Billy Bragg for a Kirsty MacColl box set. And he told me about the story of them putting together that version and Kirsty having invited him over for a full English breakfast, which I loved. Very Kirsty MacColl. And, say, bring it, if you've got any spare legs, bring them over, we'll work it out, And by the end of, the fried egg, they'd sorted it out.
Yeah. I can't remember a time when I didn't know of Kirsty MacColl. It's very difficult to... I suppose I remember her through a very early records on Stiff, and then there's a guy who works down the chip shop, swears he's Elvis, which came out.
We put on the cover of Smash Hits, didn't we?
She's on the cover of Smash Hits, and of course, in her in her career, she wasn't on the cover of many magazines. I wouldn't have thought, but there she was on the cover of Smash Hits with an extraordinary hairdo. I seem to remember there was. You must have seen this picture, which extraordinary kind of extensions going on over here.
Oh, I have. Yes, I have. Yeah.
As if she could. She never quite came to terms with how to be photographed. I got that feeling. You know what I mean? That it caused her great anxiety, I suppose. That she never fitted into any kind of, neat stereotype of a female pop star, I suppose. Which can't have been easy for her at all, No. And that's the thing that strikes you throughout the career. She zipped about absolutely all over the map, didn't she? And go back to the story of the album that didn't come out was a kind of electronic-y album, wasn't it? It was sort of in the shadow of the Human League almost, wasn't it? Tell us about that.
Yeah, she was a really big fan of early Simple Minds as well, actually. And it was through them she met Steve Lillywhite, who became her husband, the, very celebrated producer, another person who basically spent an hour and a half on the phone to me trying to tell me how she was a better producer than him. But she was really into, synths and just wanted to, play with them. But I got the sense from talking to various people who were around her in those early days, people like Lou Edmonds, who's still in Public Image Limited, who, has written with her over the years. And I spoke to Philip Bodger, who's an engineer on Reel, who went on to work, for the Kathy Dennis and the Lighthouse family and bands like this. That, because she had this interest in lots of different genres, again, it was like the labels didn't really know what to do with her.
No, they didn't.
Lou said early on that because she'd had this hit, her first hit was, the guy who works down the chip shop. They wanted to kind of almost make more novelty hits out of what she did. Because she had a quality to her writing which was funny and stood out. And obviously with female artists especially, that was a novelty, having those kind of cheeky, wry lyrics. And if you think of female pop stars over the years, there's not many people who've had success doing that kind of thing. Lily Allen is the one who...
No, that's true.
That's so true, because it's so humorous, isn't it? You broke my heart in 17 places, in one of the Shepherd's Bush or whatever, that most people wrote about love in a slightly forlorn and suffering way, but she just sent up the whole absurdity of things going wrong.
Oh, I remember when I was in the very early days of Word, Dave talking about Kirsty and why he wanted there to be a Kirsty MacColl musical. And I remember thinking, I'm going to like this guy because this is a good idea. But talking about, the way that I think he was talking about Tropical Brainstorm, her last album, and England 2, Colombia 0, which is so savage.
It's brilliant.
But hilarious. But she could also do stuff that was funny, but also very, very sad. Off that album as well as a track, which is one of my favourites of hers, Autumn Girl Soup. Right. Which has got these lovely lines about her being an autumn girl, wanting on the endless search for summer. But there's this bit about love. I'm going to read this bit out because I've written this down here. I think it's my favourite Kirsty lyric. It's using a metaphor in a way that's so unusual but so brilliant. Get me on the boil and reduce me to a simmering wreck with a slow kiss to the back of my neck. Carve up my heart on a very low flame. Separate my feelings, then pour them down the drain. So who could have these cooking metaphors and make them sound so sharp and funny, but also really touching? Carve up my heart. Reduce me. Like she's
she was brilliant. She was brilliant at that. A lot of people can fasten upon a good gimmick idea for a song, but she could take a metaphor and she could follow it all the way through the song. She could absolutely develop it. And of course, the one you referred to, England 2, Colombia 0, which I think you say in the piece in the booklet was based on a real life experience. That after her marriage with Steve Lillywhite had come to an end, and she had some affair with a guy who did turn out to have 3 children and a wife. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Actually, 3 children. And, so we went to a pub in Belsize Park and we cheered on England as the skies went dark, And then it turns out you never told me you had 3 children. You never said you had a wife. Now it's England 2, Colombia 0. And I know just how those Colombians feel.
Oh, it's so great.
It's so clever.
It's a brilliant song. And it's not the only one, I'm sorry, I'm going to go on about my pet idea of a Kirsty MacColl musical, which I know will never happen, but I've utterly developed in my head. I don't have the skills to do it, but it's called In These Shoes, ? Which is just a perfect title for a musical. It is set in, do you want to hear how I developed this? It's set in rehearsals for a TV dance show. That's how it works. The musical signature of the thing is that kind of Latin sound that she, developed on those later records. And basically its main characters, you have 5 women of different ages who are all competing in this dance show. And they, via various Kirsty MacColl songs, they talk about their own personal experiences.
Oh, amazing.
So you've got things like Don't Come the Cowboy with Me, Sonny Jim. The first half ends with In These Shoes, which is, everybody knows that song. And the second half ends, obviously, because musicals have to end at Christmas. It ends with A Fairy Tale of New York. And I'm sorry, it's a massive smash. If somebody
Dave Hepworth, impresario. I love
that is simply brilliant, Dave. So doesn't Mark Nevin, who I think co-wrote, there's a guy who works down the chip shop, didn't he say, maybe in your notes actually, that there was a theme developing? That all blokes are going to lie and cheat and let you down, and that became a theme running through a lot of her songs. I mean, that's fairly true to say, isn't it?
Yeah, she was. I think she was, scarred, maybe a bit full on, but I think she was in some ways by kind of that knowledge of what men were like from her relationship with her father. And
which was complicated and distant, wasn't it? And he left her mum for another woman, etc.
Yeah, she has a half brother, Neil MacColl, who's a brilliant guitarist and well-known, musician with lots of different bands. 6 months after her, I think, or was it 6 months before? It was, it was that window. Somebody was pregnant when somebody else was becoming pregnant. But yeah, and he would drift in, on weekends to see her. They did, he did see her, but then he'd say, "Oh yeah, I'm off on tour for 3 weeks, bye," and that was basically it. So she was very much brought by her mother, her mother's, a very amazing kind of dancer and was an assistant to the guy who ran the Trinity Levant Conservatoire. She was an eminent, artistic force herself, and she gave it all up to look after her daughter. So all these things, obviously fed into the development of who Kirsty was. She was a really, really clever kid. She had an incredible high IQ. There's this amazing clip that you can see on the BBC iPlayer online about her when she's about 6 or 7, on this program about, exceptionally clever kids. And I've had some people send me messages since the box has come out saying, "Oh, I was in school with her and she was a real force of nature, somebody to be reckoned with."
I've not seen this. What happens in the clip? She's 6, is she?
6 or 7, I think. And she kind of, it's her little tiny face. It's really quite moving to see it. And she's asked, "What do you think of your school?" And she goes, "Oh, it's just horrible." Like this. But she wasn't in mainstream schooling as well because she was really ill as a kid. She had very severe asthma and she could not be out a lot of the time. It was something that she got over as she got older. So she had all this stuff going on in her childhood, but still had this very forthright personality in the mix. And you think of all those contradictions and when you listen to her songwriting, and it's really interesting.
Yeah. But it was the case. I mean, she did have a lot of people within the music business who thought she was fantastic for loads and loads of different reasons. So it wasn't that her talent was overlooked at all. It wasn't. There were loads of people who thought she was brilliant. But what they all found was they didn't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
There was no slot you could put her in at all, really. And it's just one of those tragic truths, isn't it, really? You can't see what they could have done different. Would you say that's the case?
Yeah, I think she was slightly reticent to become part of the machine as well, which is fair enough if that's not what she wanted to do. But, you think about how her songs launched Tracey Ullman's massive American career. And
via Dave Robinson's wife's hairdresser, is that right?
That is right, yeah.
Tell that story.
Oh, that's brilliant. So Tracey Ullman's in a hairdresser next to Dave Robinson, Stiff Records' wife, and they just get chatting. And this is the early days of Tracey Ullman doing bits of TV.
Yeah.
And she says, I reckon you should do some singing. Have you heard these songs? Because they had all these songs of Kirsty's that had, not been hits, and almost knew that, what I find interesting is, like, can you imagine a lot of female artists, not necessarily female artists, who, their songs are given to somebody else and they make them really famous. You might be a bit bitter, you might be a bit cross, but Kirsty really supported Tracey. There was a note Tracey couldn't sing that amazing, I can't sing it, obviously, baby on...
You did very well there, Jude. I was about to have a go myself. You did very well.
There we go. Not bad for an alto from South Wales. She did that note, and they kept in touch. And, everyone I contacted to be interviewed for this box set just threw themselves at it. And I thought, right, I really want to get Tracey Ullman. I'll never get Tracey Ullman. There's no way of finding her she is. I literally sent, an email through a American management contact form on a website. Within a day, I was like, yes, I want to talk about her. Right. And I Zoomed for about an hour with Tracey Ullman, and she was so gushing and lovely, and talked about this day they'd spent together in 2000, which was the last year of Tracey's life, where Kirsty just gone over and spent a day with Tracey talking about their lives and their kids, and they drank loads of tea and hung out. And I just thought, wow, it's amazing that she's, she obviously found a connection in her and sustained that friendship. But what I loved, the one thing is stuck in my head talking about this record, and I interviewed James Knight, who was her partner, was there when she died. And he said that she, if she was interested in you, she was all in. She was completely committed. And if you let her down, she was devastated. There were these big emotions. But she said she was also, can I swear in this? I don't know. Can I swear?
Yes, I think.
She was also a fucking roller coaster.
Right.
So there's this combination of this stuff. And I think people love that in songs a lot of the time. We love these big emotions and all this kind of stuff. We don't necessarily know how to handle that in people. And maybe, the record labels found it hard to try and gauge what to do with her and control her. But
lots of people identified with her as a kind of connected with her as a kind of kindred spirit, didn't they? French and Saunders are a really good example. And you thought that would really help her career because they really collaborated with her and promoted her. But it didn't make a vast amount of difference, as you say, because she needed to be marketed a certain way, didn't she? Yeah.
And when you hear an album like Kite, though, you just think, this is amazing. All the songs are amazing. Electric Landlady. No, actually, not all of them. Do you think Titanic Days, I think, is amazing. That's one that's kind of, that came out on ZTT. And, you notice she just came out on different record labels all the time because she was dropped or moved about. And
do you think there's a case that we have difficulty dealing with songwriters who are kind of self-deprecating about themselves? Who's very, their songwriting style is kind of, I describe a life where I'm a bit of a mess, where it kind of goes wrong, you know what I mean? And that people have difficulty kind of giving the appropriate image to somebody who's like that. Do you think that's the case?
I think it's much more the case with women, actually. Think of Morrissey, right? Maybe not these days, but at his, in his pomp, 80s and 90s, the way he was treated by the press. He was actually, after the Union Jack nonsense and all that, he was still, held up very high in the press. He was allowed to whinge and moan and be self-deprecating as much as he would, and was sort of put on a pedestal, by a lot of people. It's really struck me, it's brilliant that this box set has got a lot of attention, and, people are talking about it. I've been on Woman's Hour talking about it. It's been brilliant. But there haven't been any massive pieces in music magazines. And that, there've been lots of great coverage, but I want to read like the 8-page feature. That would have been in Word, obviously. Of course it would. But she doesn't.
Why do you think there haven't been, though? Why is that? Why do you think there haven't been pieces in the music? I mean, do you think it's just not part of their agenda somehow, Kirsty MacColl? I mean,
I think she gets overlooked because she was female, and I think that's just the way it was, really. Kind of. There are a few, there are your Jonies and your Kate Bushes, who are sort of also, amazing artists, but also really gorgeous when they were young. Not that Kirsty wasn't, very attractive, but she didn't fit in your typical idea of somebody who's Kate Bush and Joni Mitchell have a mystery about them, right?
I tell you,
no
it's
mystery about Kirsty.
No, I know what you mean, but
mystery.
It's interesting. You talk about Kate Bush and Joni Mitchell. I couldn't help notice this because yesterday was Joni Mitchell's 80th birthday.
Yeah,
right?
It was.
And you couldn't move on social media for kind of gushing tributes to Joni Mitchell. I thought, hang on, when Joni Mitchell was 40, nobody was doing this. When Joni Mitchell was 50, nobody was doing this at all. It was just Joni Mitchell. She's part of the furniture. Whereas now, it kind of takes a long time. And a similar thing happened with Kate Bush. Not quite so late in life. But, when Kate Bush was 30, people weren't going around saying we're very blessed to be sharing the planet with Kate Bush, were they? These things can very often take a long time for these things.
Yeah, I think it's also because obviously there are we're at a time now where there are older musicians who are not with us anymore. So the ones we still have, we're celebrating more, and also. This is the first time in human history when pop stars have turned 80. I know there's been other versions of celebrity in the past, but,
That's true. It's a benchmark, isn't it? Yeah. That's absolutely right. But do you think that her sort of legacy is expanding in the way that, say, Nick Drake's is? I mean, you still feel that Nick Drake is getting bigger as a concept every day. Do you think that's happening with her?
I'd like it to. I think, a box set like this, which has all these different examples of her work in so many genres and stuff, can only do that a little bit more. Again, Nick Drake's a mysterious character. I think Kirsty, she's mysterious in a very different way. The fact that, she can write these incredibly cutting, savage, sensitive songs that absolutely nail things. Maybe we're kind of... people are getting more into those ideas of, I hate to say, allowing women to kind of express themselves like that and allowing them to enjoy women expressing themselves like that. I'm sure when Kirsty first came along, I'd love to know more from you about this, Dave, kind of how she stood out in the punk scene. Obviously there's lots of women who were standing out in the punk scene, but she was never interested in being fashionable, actually.
No, that's it.
I think that's maybe something really interesting about Kirsty is... She was never like, right, I'm going to make a synth pop album because it's trendy. She was like, no, I love that the early Simple Minds stuff. I love Glittering Price. So I'm going to make something that's influenced by this. She made an album influenced by Cuban music because she was really into Cuban music.
Yeah.
Not because, the Buena Vista Social Club. She was just, and she'd been into it since she was a kid, So, yeah, maybe because she's... doesn't sit within fashion very easily. I think people are more open to letting that in. I really hope she kind of, hearing songs of hers will, expand this stuff. And it is lovely that she is known, even though she is known for Fairy Tale in New York, we hear her every year.
Yes.
And lots of people know her, people I know I've told about this box, I said, oh, I love her voice. And they know that because of that song, most people. Yeah. And so if they hear that this voice is on so many other songs, then hopefully that will extend her legacy in that way.
Right.
So can you think of any singers who've been influenced by her?
I was asked this recently, and I thought this is quite interesting because it's hard to see a sort of direct legacy. I was in a cafe yesterday after being on Woman's Hour, and LDN by Lily Allen came on, which instantly, I have to say, took me back to the Word offices in 2005. And Mark Allen jumping up going, Jude, I want you to interview this new singer. I think she's good. She wears big skirts and trainers. It's got the sample from a reggae track. I can't remember what it is. It goes, da, 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 da. And I thought, God, this is Kirsty MacColl. It's kind of the sampling in these shoes, and using it in a similar way. And she's talking about London, how she loves it, and how it's a bit shit. And I thought, wow. But I don't know if she's influenced by Kirsty, but I'm sure she was around that music, Lily Allen, with her, very going to Glastonbury with Joe Strummer and a dad and a mum being in, the arts or whatever. I'm sure she might have been exposed to it. And after her, obviously, there were people like, what was her name? God, how quickly forget? Kate Nash. There was a kind of surge of women like that. I think younger female artists seem to be more earnest and serious these days.
Yeah,
there's not as much humour, which I'm sad about.
So you've got this. As we said, it's eight CDs. BBC recordings, other people's songs, or whatever. Which of these are you most personally attached to? Do you think people ought to attend to?
Of the CDs, that's hard. I'd say, part of me say, if you want a kind of introduction, go to the singles, because that's the first disc, which is 21 songs. Starts with They Don't Know and finishes in these shoes, and you see the range of her talent, country, kind of mambo, her song Caroline, which is an answer record to Jolene from the 90s, which was on her Best of Galore, which is amazing. But yeah, and it's got this lovely kind of range of stuff. I really like listening to her collaborations as well, because she could just blend really kind of easily into these amazing songs. There's an Alison Moyet track, and you can barely know it's her. It's called Wishing You Were Here, and Alison Moyet put on the credits that Kirsty was the Elysian chorus, which I loved. Elysian chorus. I never know how to say that, but she could sit back when she wanted to, and she could stand out when she wanted to. Soho Square is always one of my favourites as well, and there's a lovely BBC session on disc 7, and there's some real banging house remixes, which I sort of helped get by when I was talking to James Knight, her partner. Kirsty loved listening to crazy house remixes of her songs. She listened to her songs a lot as well, which I thought was interesting.
Right.
She liked to kind of see what these things were, and quite often had all-night listening sessions with lashings of red wine, listening to all kinds of stuff. And some nights were dedicated to listen to her own music and trying to work out, kind of what to do next.
Well, there it is. As they used to say in the old newspaper ad, all human life is there. 8 discs. Kirsty MacColl, See That Girl. Get it for Christmas.